For decades, Blazing Saddles has been remembered as one of the boldest comedies Hollywood has ever produced. Audiences laughed at the outrageous jokes, unforgettable characters, and fearless satire that pushed boundaries few films would dare approach. But beneath the nonstop comedy, there was another story, one that many fans never fully understood. It wasn't hidden in a deleted scene or locked away in a studio vault. Instead, it was woven quietly into the film itself, waiting for audiences to notice. Years after the movie became a cultural phenomenon, Gene Wilder reflected on the experience in interviews and conversations about working alongside Mel Brooks. While fans often focused on the outrageous humor, Wilder believed the real brilliance of Blazing Saddles had very little to do with shock value. According to him, the film worked because every ridiculous joke served a larger purpose. It wasn't simply trying to offend people. It was exposing the absurdity of prejudice by making ignorance look foolish instead of powerful. That idea sounds simple today, but in 1974, it was incredibly risky. Hollywood westerns had followed familiar formulas for decades. Heroes wore white hats. Villains wore black. Small frontier towns faced danger before a courageous gunslinger restored order. Audiences knew exactly what to expect every time they bought a ticket. Mel Brooks wanted to destroy that formula. Instead of making another traditional western, he imagined a story that would parody the entire genre while forcing audiences to confront racial stereotypes head-on. It would be loud, chaotic, outrageous, and completely unpredictable. Many studio executives believed the idea would never work. The screenplay pushed boundaries in ways almost no mainstream comedy had attempted. It mocked racism, political hypocrisy, Hollywood cliches, and even the audience's own expectations. There were serious concerns that theaters would refuse to show it or that viewers would reject it entirely. Even during production, people working on the film understood they were making something unlike anything Hollywood had seen before. Gene Wilder wasn't part of the original cast from the beginning. His character, the washed-up gunslinger Jim, entered the story after production was already underway. Wilder had previously worked with Mel Brooks on The Producers, and Brooks knew he possessed a rare ability to balance comedy with genuine humanity. That balance would become one of the film's greatest strengths. Jim isn't introduced as a fearless legend riding triumphantly into town. Instead, audiences first meet him asleep in a jail cell, surrounded by empty bottles and haunted by his own failures. On paper, the character could have been little more than another comic stereotype. Gene Wilder refused to play him that way. Rather than portraying Jem as simply drunk or foolish, Wilder searched for the sadness beneath the jokes. Every hesitant movement, every quiet pause, and every gentle smile suggested this was a man who had once been respected but had slowly lost faith in himself. That emotional honesty became essential. Without Jim, Blazing Saddles could easily have become nothing more than a collection of outrageous sketches. Wilder gave the film something unexpected, a heart. One scene perfectly demonstrates this approach. When Sheriff Bart, played brilliantly by Cleavon Little, meets Jim for the first time, the conversation isn't built around elaborate slapstick. Instead, it's surprisingly quiet. Jim listens carefully. Bart speaks honestly. Two strangers begin forming a friendship based not on race or reputation, but on mutual respect. Gene Wilder later suggested that moments like these mattered far more than the outrageous jokes surrounding them. The comedy attracted audiences, but the relationships gave them a reason to care. Looking back, many fans remember the famous one-liners, explosive gags, and unforgettable final act. Yet Wilder believed the emotional connection between Bart and Jim was what truly grounded the entire film. That friendship also carried a deeper message. At a time when racial tensions remained highly visible across America, Blazing Saddles dared to show two completely different men standing together against ignorance. Neither character was portrayed as perfect. Both had flaws. Both made mistakes. But they recognized each other's humanity long before anyone else in the story did. According to Wilder, that was never accidental. Mel Brooks encouraged actors to find sincerity inside even the most absurd situations. If every scene became nothing but exaggerated comedy, audiences would eventually stop believing in the characters. Instead, Brooks constantly reminded the cast that they had to play their roles truthfully. Ironically, treating ridiculous situations seriously often made them even funnier. Gene Wilder embraced that philosophy completely. Rather than chasing laughs, he concentrated on playing Jim as a real person. His emotional restraint allowed Cleveland Little's confident performance to shine even brighter. Together, they created one of comedy's most memorable partnerships without relying on constant punchlines. It became a lesson Wilder would carry throughout the rest of his career. Many actors believe comedy comes from trying to be funny. Gene Wilder believed the exact opposite. The funniest moments happened when characters sincerely believed every word they were saying, no matter how ridiculous the situation became. That philosophy shaped not only Blazing Saddles, but later performances in Young Frankenstein and Silver Streak. Years later, fans continued asking Gene Wilder why Blazing Saddles remained so influential after so many decades. His answer wasn't about controversial jokes. It wasn't about pushing boundaries. And it certainly wasn't about shocking audiences. Instead, Wilder pointed towards something much simpler: truth hidden beneath comedy. He believed audiences could sense honesty, even inside complete absurdity. They laughed because the characters felt real. They remembered the movie because the emotions underneath the jokes never disappeared. Ironically, that may have been the biggest secret many viewers overlooked all along.
Gene Wilder's respect for his fellow actors became especially important during the making of Blazing Saddles. One performance, in particular, convinced him that the film had the potential to become far more than just another comedy. That performance came from Cleveland Little. Little carried the enormous responsibility of playing Sheriff Bart, a black lawman sent to a town filled with openly racist residents. It was a role that demanded impeccable comic timing while also maintaining dignity in the face of relentless hostility. Wilder admired how Little never overplayed the character. Instead of responding to hatred with anger or exaggerated emotion, Bart often answered ignorance with intelligence, confidence, and quiet humor. That approach changed everything. If Bart had been written as merely a victim, the story would have become depressing. If he had been portrayed as invincible, audiences might never have connected with him. Cleveland Little found the perfect balance, allowing viewers to laugh while never forgetting that the prejudice aimed at his character reflected real attitudes that existed beyond the screen. Gene Wilder later praised Little's generosity as an actor. During scenes together, neither performer tried to steal attention from the other. Instead, they listened, reacted naturally, and trusted the dialogue to do the work. That chemistry couldn't be manufactured. It developed because both actors understood that the friendship between Jim and Bart formed the emotional backbone of the entire movie. Ironically, one of the biggest lessons Wilder learned from Blazing Saddles had nothing to do with comedy at all. It was about trust. Mel Brooks assembled a cast filled with talented performers, but he also gave them room to experiment. Actors could suggest different line readings, adjust their timing, and occasionally improvise if they believed it made a scene stronger. Wilder appreciated that freedom, but he also recognized its limits. Improvisation only worked when everyone involved remained committed to the same story. That level of collaboration helped create many of the film's most memorable moments. Fans often assume every famous joke was carefully scripted months in advance. In reality, the atmosphere on set encouraged creativity. Writers and actors constantly searched for ways to sharpen scenes without losing the larger message behind them. Some ideas disappeared immediately. Others survived because they revealed something truthful about the characters. Gene Wilder believed audiences could always sense the difference. A joke added merely for shock rarely lasted. A joke rooted in character often became timeless. Looking back, Wilder also admitted that no one involved expected Blazing Saddles to become such a lasting success. They hoped audiences would laugh, but they couldn't predict that the movie would still be discussed decades later in film schools, comedy documentaries, and conversations about Hollywood history. Part of that lasting appeal came from its willingness to challenge viewers instead of simply entertaining them. The film constantly turned expectations upside down. Heroes behaved like ordinary people. Villains often exposed their own stupidity. Authority figures appeared ridiculous instead of admirable. Every familiar Western stereotype was dismantled piece by piece until audiences realized they had been laughing at assumptions they rarely questioned before. According to Wilder, that was the real magic of Mel Brooks' filmmaking. Brooks never mocked people for who they were. He mocked arrogance, ignorance, and blind prejudice. That distinction mattered. Over the years, some viewers misunderstood Blazing Saddles, focusing only on its provocative language while overlooking its deeper purpose. Gene Wilder felt that anyone watching carefully would recognize that the targets of the jokes were never the victims of racism. The true targets were the people whose hatred made them look foolish. It was satire in its purest form. Rather than preaching to audiences, the film invited them to laugh first and think afterward. That combination proved far more effective than delivering a straightforward lecture. People remembered the comedy, but many also left the theater with a slightly different perspective than when they entered. Wilder believed that was one of Mel Brooks' greatest gifts as a filmmaker. He understood that humor could open doors that serious speeches often could not. Even today, many comedians point to Blazing Saddles as proof that comedy can tackle difficult subjects without abandoning compassion. The film refused to ignore painful realities, but it also refused to let hatred define the story. Instead, friendship, courage, and intelligence ultimately prevailed. For Gene Wilder, that may have been the lesson most audiences overlooked. They remembered the outrageous jokes. They remembered the unforgettable one-liners. But they sometimes forgot that beneath every laugh was a story about people choosing understanding over fear. And according to Wilder, that message was the reason Blazing Saddles continued finding new audiences generation after generation. As the years passed, Gene Wilder rarely spoke about Blazing Saddles as simply another successful movie. Whenever he reflected on the film, his comments often revealed something deeper. Success at the box office was gratifying. But what impressed him most was that audiences kept discovering new meanings every time they watched it. Some viewers laughed at the physical comedy. Others appreciated the clever dialogue. Still others recognized the film's fearless criticism of intolerance and hypocrisy. Wilder found that fascinating. He believed truly memorable films evolve with their audience. What someone notices at 20 years old may be completely different from what they understand at 50. Blazing Saddles had that rare quality. Every generation seemed to uncover another layer hidden beneath the outrageous humor. Ironically, one of the film's most famous qualities nearly prevented it from being made. Studio executives worried that audiences wouldn't understand the satire. They feared viewers would mistake the film's mockery of racism for an endorsement of offensive attitudes. It was a genuine concern, especially during an era when Hollywood tended to avoid subjects that might provoke controversy. Mel Brooks refused to compromise. Gene Wilder admired that determination. He understood that removing the uncomfortable moments would also remove the film's central message. Satire loses its power when it becomes too safe. The audience had to feel uncomfortable before they could recognize how ridiculous prejudice truly looked. That courage became one of the defining characteristics of the production. Everyone involved understood they were taking creative risks. No one knew whether critics would praise the film or condemn it. No one knew whether audiences would embrace its unusual style or reject it altogether. They simply trusted the story. Years later, Gene Wilder suggested that trust was one of the greatest strengths any filmmaker could possess. Instead of trying to predict every audience reaction, Mel Brooks focused on making the best version of the movie he believed in. Ironically, that honesty resonated far more than carefully calculated entertainment ever could. The film's influence gradually spread beyond comedy. Directors began studying its structure. Screenwriters admired its fearless storytelling. Actors appreciated how every major character, no matter how absurd, was treated like a real person rather than a walking punchline. That attention to character made all the difference. Gene Wilder often explained that comedy without believable characters quickly becomes forgettable. Audiences may laugh once, but they rarely return. when viewers genuinely care about the people on screen. However, the humor becomes timeless. That philosophy defined his entire career. Whether playing Jim in Blazing Saddles, Frederick Frankenstein in Young Frankenstein, or Willy Wonka in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Wilder searched for emotional truth before searching for laughs. He once suggested that actors shouldn't ask themselves, "How can I make this funny?" Instead, they should ask, "What does this character honestly believe?" If that answer was sincere, the comedy usually followed naturally. Looking back today, it's remarkable how many conversations about Blazing Saddles still revolve around whether a film like it could be made in the modern era. Gene Wilder never seemed particularly interested in that debate. Rather than comparing different generations, he preferred discussing why the movie succeeded in the first place. Its success wasn't built on controversy. It wasn't built on offensive language. It wasn't built on shocking audiences. It was built on fearless storytelling supported by talented performers who understood exactly what they were trying to say. Perhaps that's what Gene Wilder believed most fans never fully figured out. The movie wasn't asking viewers to laugh at people. It was asking them to laugh at ignorance itself. Every outrageous scene, every unexpected twist, and every unforgettable joke ultimately pointed toward that single idea. For Wilder, Blazing Saddles wasn't remembered because it crossed lines. It was remembered because it revealed how meaningless those lines had always been. That realization transformed an outrageous Western parody into something far more enduring. A film that continues to entertain, while quietly reminding audiences that hatred often defeats itself when exposed to honesty, intelligence, and laughter. And perhaps that is Gene Wilder's greatest legacy from Blazing Saddles. Beneath the unforgettable comedy was a timeless belief that humor, when guided by compassion and truth, could challenge prejudice more effectively than anger ever could. Decades later, audiences are still laughing, but many are also discovering the deeper message that Gene Wilder believed had been there from the very beginning. Gene Wilder also understood something that few actors ever experience. Some films entertain audiences for a season, while others quietly disappear into history. But every once in a while, a movie grows larger than anyone who created it. Blazing Saddles became one of those rare films. Its reputation didn't happen overnight. When it first premiered in 1974, reactions were passionate. Many critics praised its originality, while others questioned whether its provocative style had gone too far. Yet audiences kept showing up. Word of mouth spread quickly, and before long, the film became one of the highest-grossing comedies of its era. Even then, Gene Wilder never believed the movie's popularity came from controversy alone. He believed people returned because they recognized something genuine beneath the outrageous humor. Over time, countless comedians cited Blazing Saddles as an inspiration. Directors studied Mel Brooks' fearless approach to satire. Film historians pointed to the movie as one of the boldest examples of comedy being used to expose social prejudice instead of reinforcing it. Wilder appreciated those discussions, but he always brought the conversation back to the people behind the performances. He admired Cleavon Little's quiet confidence. He respected Mel Brooks' willingness to challenge convention. He appreciated the writers who refused to settle for easy jokes. Most of all, he valued the sense of trust that existed throughout the production. Everyone involved understood the assignment. They weren't trying to create outrage. They were trying to create honesty. That honesty, wrapped inside outrageous comedy, became the film's greatest achievement. Looking back decades later, it's easy to focus on the movie's most famous scenes. Fans quote the jokes, remember the unforgettable characters, and celebrate the moments that have become part of comedy history. But Gene Wilder hoped audiences would notice something else. He wanted them to see the humanity. Jim never judged Bart by the color of his skin. Bart never judged Jim by his failures. Their friendship developed because each recognized the goodness in the other before anyone else did. That simple idea carried the entire story. Without it, the comedy would have had no emotional foundation. Without it, the satire would have felt empty. Without it, Blazing Saddles would likely have been remembered as little more than another outrageous parody. Instead, it became something much greater. Perhaps that's what Gene Wilder believed most fans never figured out. The movie wasn't truly about the Wild West. It wasn't really about sheriffs, outlaws, or frontier towns. It was about exposing fear, ignorance, and hatred by refusing to treat them with respect. The villains weren't dangerous because they were powerful. They were dangerous because they were foolish. And the heroes didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they refused to surrender their humanity. That message has allowed Blazing Saddles to remain relevant for more than 50 years. Comedy styles change. Hollywood changes. Audiences change. But stories built on truth have a remarkable ability to endure. Gene Wilder's performance remains one of the finest examples of understated comedy ever captured on film. Not because he demanded attention, but because he quietly anchored every scene with sincerity. His calm presence allowed the chaos around him to feel even funnier, proving that restraint can sometimes be more powerful than exaggeration. Today, when people remember Gene Wilder, they often think of his unforgettable roles, his unmistakable voice, and his remarkable ability to balance humor with genuine emotion. Those qualities are exactly what made Jim one of his most beloved performances. In the end, Gene Wilder's greatest revelation wasn't a hidden, behind-the-scenes secret or an untold Hollywood scandal. It was a reminder that the real brilliance of Blazing Saddles was never its shock value. It was its courage, its compassion, and its unwavering belief that laughter could expose prejudice better than hatred ever could. That's the truth Gene Wilder hoped audiences would carry with them long after the credits rolled. And perhaps the reason Blazing Saddles continues to be celebrated as one of the most daring and meaningful comedies ever made.